Draco Malfoy and the cousin he'd never asked for. Thank you very much. But Draco will hear about this. Chapter 6. So, maybe Draco's family was only half bad, after all. The remaining weeks of the school year slipped by relatively eventlessly. Draco and the Slytherin team lost their last match against Hufflepuff in March. Draco cursing Diggory to hell and back for beating him to the point where he hoped Harry would humiliate him in his own match. And Gryffindor won theirs in May, high enough to win the House Cup. While Draco felt little house loyalty to Slytherin, he was envious. After the House Championship had been cancelled the previous year due to the events with the Chamber of Secrets, he had now lost his chance at winning again. He had no time to sulk over it, though, as exams approached fast, and he spent most of his time stuck with his friends in the library. This year, he actually felt like he needed to put an effort into revision, considering his workload, but it was nothing against Hermione, who, even after skipping divination, still had one subject too many. It showed in the form of thin nerves and dark rings under her eyes. Draco tried his best to help her out, but Hermione being Hermione, she'd rather swallow Longbottom's toad than give work out of her hands. So his support was limited to sitting next to her and only speaking when he was spoken to. A week before the exams, though, Harry pulled him aside after lunch, confessing to him in a hushed voice that he'd managed to get the Marauder's map confiscated. "What?" Draco gasped. "Harry!" "It was an accident," Harry muttered. "I saw something on the map and Oh, never mind. Anyway, Lupin has it now." "Lupin?" Draco asked, surprised. "I did not exactly put Lupin for the kind of teacher to—" "He was furious with me," Harry told him gravely. "He said that I should have realized that this map, in Black's hands, was a map to me and, well, some other stuff. Anyways, I don't think he'll give it back to me." For an uncomfortable moment, Draco realized that with the knowledge of the map, Lupin would understand how Draco had been able to give him the information he had, and that Draco had kept Harry's secret despite the danger he knew it could pose for his friend. "Well," Draco said heavily, "what's done is done. Maybe it is good to have the map in the hand of a teacher after all." "Yeah," Harry sighed, not sounding like he meant it. "Let's not tell Hermione about it, though, okay?" "She will find out eventually," Draco reminded him. "Yes, but not right now." Harry made a face. "She's so tense, and the last thing I want is another fight so close to the exams." "Yeah, all right," Draco agreed. "It's probably best to wait till she's in a better mood." The awaited better mood did not fall upon them in the next couple of weeks. Exams were much crueler than the ones they'd sat in their first year, and while Draco thought he'd done okay in most of them, the others had smaller or bigger breakdowns throughout them. Weasley swore he had flunked history of magic. How a pureblood like him could not pass in a subject so essential to his own identity, Draco would never understand. An incompetent teacher was no excuse. And Hermione burst into tears halfway through Defense Against the Dark Arts. Harry took the crown of breakdowns, though, when, after his divination exam, he swore to Draco and Harry that he thought the old hag Trelawny had made him an actual, real prophecy. "You don't understand," Harry insisted when the two of them just looked at each other, eyebrows raised. "You weren't there. She went in some kind of trance, you could say, and she said—" "Harry," Draco said in his best calm voice, "I think you're tired. Exams have been rough on all of us, and—" "It's not that," Harry growled, glaring at him. "I swear to you, "Trelawney is an old fraud," Hermione insisted. "Whatever she says, Harry, I really doubt you're going to die no matter how many great old dogs she sees in your future." "It's got nothing to do with the Grim," Harry objected. "Or me, for that matter. It's—" He was interrupted, though, by Weasley hurrying to their table, eyes wide. "We gotta go down to Hagrid's," he announced, waving with a note in his hand. "I just got an owl from him. He found scholars!" "Well," Draco snorted, "look who came back from the dead." Hermione coughed, but kept her silence, much to Draco's admiration, as Weasley flushed, darker than his hair color. "Yes, all right," he muttered under his breath. "I'll apologize to Crookshanks when I see him." "Crookshanks!" Hermione spluttered indignantly. "Are you coming or not?" Weasley demanded. "Because it's getting dark, and if we linger much longer, we won't be back before curfew." "Yes, fine," Harry muttered, frustration apparent in his voice as he got to his feet. The walk down to Hagrid's was a tense one, with Hermione and Weasley bickering in full force about who deserved what degree of apology, Draco siding with Hermione completely, though he did not get involved. And Harry sulked to himself. Don't be like that, Draco said after a while, elbowing him. Exams are over. A dead rat has been recovered alive. Let's be at peace, shall we? I wasn't seeing things. Harry burst out, his voice an angry hiss. Trelawny did make a real prophecy. Draco sighed deeply. Fine, he said. Let's say I believed it. What was the prophecy about? Forget it, Harry muttered. Oh, for heaven's sake! Draco muttered, turning to Weasley and Hermione, interrupting them mid-argument. You two go ahead and get that rat back. Harry and I will wait out here, all right? Weasley looked like he was going to complain, but Hermione, with one glance towards Harry, grabbed the redhead's elbow and dragged him on towards Hagrid's hut, which was already in sight from where Draco stepped into Harry's way, bringing them both to an abrupt halt. Come on, Draco said. You're obviously dying to tell me, and I'm starting to get curious. What kind of prophecy was it? Why should I tell you if you don't believe me? Harry spat, obviously wounded. It made Draco feel a little mad about himself. I'm sorry, he murmured. I did not mean it out you. It's just... You realize how unbelievable this sounds, right? Of course I do, Harry snapped. But real life hasn't always been very believable when I am concerned. Now has it? Grudgingly, Draco had to admit that Harry had a point there. Now tell me, Draco pleaded. What was the prophecy about? Harry seemed to be struggling with himself, torn between his indignation and the need to share what he had heard, until the latter won out, and he burst out, Above Voldemort. Draco flinched. The Dark Lord? He asked weakly, silently thinking he'd never get used to his friend's tendency of speaking the name out loud. Yes, Harry nodded. She said... Well, I think she said... He held in for a moment, as if to sort his thoughts. I think Black might join up with Voldemort again. Draco just looked at him, quite speechless. He had expected some kind of silly prophecy along the lines of, the thing you dread the most will happen soon, or someone you care about will be hurt, or something equally as ominous. Not this. She did not name Black, Harry amended quickly, but she said something about a servant chained for 12 years, and really, who else could it be? There are a lot of former Death Eaters in Azkaban, Draco reminded him faintly. Yes, but they are in Azkaban, Harry pointed out. Black is the only one free to go where he pleases, right? Not the only one, but I see your points, Draco nodded. Isn't Black's aim you, though, rather than... He's tried getting to me for almost a year without success, Harry noted. Maybe he lost patience and decided to search out his former master. Draco gulped, and a long silence fell upon them. He could feel Harry's eyes on him, but Draco was staring out into the forest where the sun was slowly starting to set. I think you should tell Dumbledore, Draco concluded. So you believe me? Harry asked, relieved. I'm not sure if I believe that Trelawny is a true seer, Draco clarified. But anyway, Dumbledore should hear about this, because if she turns out to be right, this is serious. Harry opened his mouth to respond, but he was cut off by a yell from Weasley. They both turned to find Weasley and Hermione running towards them, anxious looks on their faces. Catch him! Weasley yelled. He's trying to get away! Who? Draco frowned, but Harry was already searching the floor, and then the shabby old rat, terribly agile for having been so sickly all year, slipped through Draco's legs too fast for him to react. Oh, Draco said stupidly, but he was shoved out of the way by Weasley, who desperately tried to catch up with his pet. Crookshanks! Hermione moaned, almost running into Draco at first. No, go away, Crookshanks, go away! Draco only belatedly took note of the fluffy monster chasing after the cat a moment before Weasley threw himself onto the ground, fingers closing around the scrambling rat. Gotcha! He groaned. Get off, you stinking cat! Crookshanks hissed and glowered at Weasley as the redhead shoved the rat into his pocket, holding it in place. Hermione picked up Crookshanks and scolded him under her breath. Come on, Ron, Harry called. Let's go up to the castle before... He trailed off in the middle of the sentence, eyes wide, shoulders tense. Draco was going to ask what was wrong when he, too, heard it. Something was approaching them fast, and it did not sound human. Draco's hand went to his wand immediately, but before he could draw it, a giant black-furred dog had jumped into their midst, throwing itself at Harry. Draco reached out immediately, quite ready to throw himself at the dog in turn, and so seemed Weasley, who was scrambling to his feet. The dog rolled off Harry, though, and with another jump it launched itself at Weasley. This time its teeth closed around Weasley's arms, and it pulled him towards the dark forest with inhuman strength. Hermione screamed. Harry was back on his feet, sprinting after them, and Draco was on his heels. Even with the baggage of Weasley's struggling body, though, the dog was too fast for them to catch up to, and then Draco recognized the tree the dog was heading towards and stopped dead in his tracks. "Harry!" he yelled. "Watch out!" But it was already too late. The whomping willow had flung one of its branches towards Harry, hitting the boy square in the chest. Harry crashed right into Draco, and the two of them went tumbling to the floor. Draco moaned, his body hurting from the force of the collision, but Harry was already back on his feet, eyes wide. Weasley and the dog were nowhere to be seen. "Where are they?" Harry demanded. The dog pulled them down that hole!" Hermione stuttered, who caught up with them, Crookshanks at her feet. She was pointing towards the roots of the tree, which was still lashing out at them in desperation. Draco cursed. "We have to go for help!" he called. "No!" Harry rejected immediately. "That thing's big enough to eat him. We haven't got the time." "We're never going to get through without help!" Hermione interjected. As if to prove her point, the willow lashed out at Harry once more, who had to jump out of the way. "If the dog can get in, we can't," Harry insisted, watching the branches of the mad tree flip back and forth, as if waiting for a moment to break through its defenses. Draco's eyes, though, were drawn to Hermione's cat, who had jumped forward, avoiding the flailing branches, like it was something he did twice a day. In no time at all, Crookshanks had reached the tree and climbed up the thick roots to place his paw purposefully on a knot of the trunk. Immediately, the tree froze, as if hit by a spell. "Salazar!" Draco muttered. "We've been outsmarted by a cat." "Crookshanks!" Hermione whispered, stunned. "How did he know?" "He's friends with that dog," Harry grumbled. "I've seen them together. Come on, and keep your wands out." They approached the tree carefully and followed Crookshanks, who went proudly ahead down the tunnel starting at the foot of the willow. It was narrow, muddy, and dark down there, and Weasley was nowhere to be seen. Harry lit his wand, and Draco copied him. "What's wrong?" Hermione whispered, sounding terrified. Draco could relate. He had a bad feeling about this. "This way," Harry pointed, bending to follow after Crookshanks. "Where does this tunnel come out?" Hermione asked. "Hogsmeade, I think," Draco muttered a little breathlessly. "It looked like that on the map." "Fred and George think no one ever got in here, so it's hard to tell," Harry added, "but it went into that general direction." "Great," Draco said under his breath. "With some luck, we'll end up in the middle of the dark forest, and then it will get really cheerful." Hermione whimpered from behind him. The tunnel did not let out in the forest, as it turned out. Instead, they found themselves in a dirty old room, pieces of broken furniture strewn everywhere, dust covering every inch of it. With a sinking feeling, Draco wished it had been the forest after all. "I think we're in the Shrieking Shack," Hermione whispered. "Brilliant!" Draco returned, his voice high. "Absolutely brilliant! I always wanted to see the most haunted building in Britain from the inside!" "Ghosts didn't do that," Harry said slowly, his eyes on the shredded pieces of a chair. "But if it's not ghosts wrecking this place," Draco said, an edge to his voice, "then what—" He broke off when a creak was to be heard from upstairs. Hermione's fingers wound themselves around Draco's arm, holding on tightly. They all stared at the ceiling before exchanging a couple of gazes that served as silent conversation. Harry went ahead, wand held high, approaching a set of stairs. Draco dislodged Hermione's grip enough to entwine their fingers, the contact giving him the courage to follow Harry. The other boy turned back to catch Draco's eyes, and they both ended their Loomis charm before climbing up the steps as quietly as they could manage. Upstairs, only one door stood open, and he followed Harry towards it. Noises were to be heard from behind it. Harry kicked the door open completely to reveal a large shabby four-poster bed on which Crookshanks was currently residing, purring and looking completely at ease with the situation. Weasley was lying on the floor next to it, clutching his leg, which was obviously broken. Hermione let go of his hand, and both her and Harry dashed towards Weasley without a second thought. Draco, though, stood frozen, his eyes searching for the dog. "Not a dog!" Weasley gulped out. "Harry, it's a trap!" "What? He's the dog! He's an animagus!" Draco's heart fell, and then he found himself grabbed by the sleeve of his cloak and shoved into the room. The door fell closed behind him. He whirled around, only to find himself face to face with his mad cousin. Sirius Black! The man looked terrible. He was nothing but flesh and bones, and his hair was a wild mess grown out to hang far past his shoulders. Yellow teeth were bared in a deranged grin.
Expelliarmus!
he called, pointing Weasley's stolen wand at him. Draco's own wand flew out of his hand, and Black caught it. Harry's and Hermione's followed. Draco stumbled backwards, trying to get away from Black, and bumped into Harry behind him. Black's wide eyes went from Draco's face to Harry's, staring intently.
I thought you'd help your friend,
Black noted, his voice rough.
Your father would have done the same for me. Brave of you not to run for a teacher. I'm grateful. It will make everything much easier.
Draco felt Harry tense behind him and acted without thinking. He turned and clung to Harry just in time before the other boy could dodge him and knock Black to the ground.
Harry! He yelped. Don't!
Let me go,
Draco. If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too,
Weasley called. He got into his feet, but he looked pale and sickly and was swaying where he stood. Hermione seemed frozen in horror. Harry was still struggling against Draco.
Lie down,
Black said, his tone surprisingly gentle, and Draco almost let go of Harry in shock at the change in his voice.
You will damage that leg even more.
Did you hear me? Weasley demanded, but Draco twisted to stare at Black. There was something soft in his expression, something Draco did not associate with a madman.
You'll have to kill all four of us. There'll be only one murder here tonight,
Black said, and the grin was back on his face. Why's that? Harry spat, pushing at Draco so violently that the Slytherin needed to return his full focus to him to make sure he would not slip through his protective grip.
Didn't care last time, did you? Didn't mind slaughtering all those muggles to get a pedigree? What's the matter, gone soft in Azkaban?
Happy! Hermione whimpered. Be quiet!
He killed my mom and dad!
Harry yelled right into Draco's ear, making him flinch. Then he pushed so hard at Draco that the other almost lost his footing and could only keep Harry from throwing himself at Black by throwing himself at the other boy in turn.
Harry!
Draco panted.
It wasn't me,
Black suddenly said, his voice very quiet.
I'm far from guiltless, I admit, but I never wanted any harm to come to Lily and James, Harry.
Liar! Harry roared, but Draco froze, his heart hammering in his chest. His hands still an iron grip on Harry's shoulders, he said, You were their secret keeper. Only you could have given their position to the Dark Lord. We heard Fudge say so himself. Black was silent for a moment before asking in a raspy voice,
You're Narcissus' boy, are you not? Draco flushed.
My parents' alliances have nothing to do with me, he clarified, his voice biting. If you think I'd hand Harry over to you because my father happened to be on your side of the war, you are gravely mistaken.
I do not think that,
Black replied, and there seemed to be a smile in his voice.
It's good to know my extended family's not completely hopeless, is all.
Harry held in at that, and Draco took that opportunity to look at his cousin over his shoulder. There was pride in his eyes, he realized with a start.
I don't expect you to believe me,
Black continued, finally answering to Draco's prior accusation.
No one does, after all. But it was not me who betrayed the Potters. I was not their secret keeper. It was someone else, and today I'll finally be able to avenge their deaths.
Draco stared at him, completely taken aback. He's lying, Hermione whispered from next to him. He's got to be. But, Draco muttered, frowning, what did Black have to gain by telling that kind of lie? He had their wands, and therefore the advantage over them. He could just go ahead and kill Harry, kill them all, and be off. He did not need to convince them of anything. And Harry seemed to realize that too, because he had stopped fighting Draco and was now staring at Black as if mesmerized. At that moment, though, movement was to be heard from downstairs. We're up here! Hermione screamed. We're up here! Sirius Black! Quick!
No,
Black whispered, grabbing Weasley's wand a little tighter.
Not out! I'm so close!
His eyes landed on Weasley, of all people, and he raised his wand. Footsteps approached, and then there was a shout of, Expelliarmus! Weasley's wand flew out of Black's hand and up into the air, followed by Draco's, Harry's, and Hermione's. Lupin stepped into the room, waving his own wand to collect them before pointing it at Black, who was his old school friend, Draco remembered. It explained the grave, complex expression the teacher was wearing.
Remus,
Black whispered something unsure. Where is he, Sirius? Lupin asked, his tongue clipped. Black only gaped at him, as did everyone else. Then slowly he raised a trembling hand, pointing it at Weasley. They all glanced at the redhead in bewilderment, but Lupin's eyes shot back to Black's, immediately begging for answers.
But then, he muttered, why hasn't he shown himself before now, unless... His eyes widened in understanding. Unless he was the one... Unless you switched... without telling me?
Black nodded, and Lupin gasped.
Professor Lupin?
Harry spoke up, his voice cutting loudly through the quiet conversation.
What's going...
But Draco put a hand on Harry's arm and shook his head. They had been wrong about Black, Draco realized. Everyone had been. Before the death of Harry's parents, someone else had been chosen as their secret keeper, and that person had betrayed them to the Dark Lord. Lupin knew it too, because he was lowering his wand, looking shaken.
Who was it?
Draco whispered, making both Lupin and Black look up at him.
Who betrayed them?
Black's face became a grimace, and his voice was hateful as he spat out.
Peter Pettigrew.
But, Hermione said, her voice small, Pettigrew is dead.
You killed him,
Weasley supplied, pointing at Black.
No! Think about it, Draco interjected. They never found Pettigrew's body, did they? I saw Pettigrew on the map, Harry muttered, the night when... So did I, Lupin said grimly. Earlier tonight when I studied the map and found you out on the grounds, in the company of two of my old school friends, Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew. But, Weasley stuttered, no one was with us. That's not true, Draco reminded him, now staring at Weasley in alarm. Both Scabbers and Crookshanks were with us.
You mean, Hermione breathed, he was an animagus too?
Exactly, Lupin responded. All three of them were animagi. Sirius, Peter, and James. My dad? Harry whispered. Yes. Lupin smiled. They did it for me. Lupin sighed, grief shining through his eyes, before saying, I guess it's time for me to tell you the whole story. After, Black spat. Let's get it over with, Remus. No! Lupin shook his head, looking at his old friend sharply. You can't just... They need to understand. There'll be all the time in the world after. No, they need to know now. They have a right to. Ron kept him as a pet. There are parts of it even I don't understand, and Harry... Harry, the truth, Sirius. Black looked at Harry then, and the fight seemed to seep out of him. All right, then, Sirius muttered. Tell them whatever you like, but make it quick, Remus. I want to commit the murder I was in prison for. You'll both not us, Weasley announced shakily. Please, Ron, Hermione said, shaking her head. Let's hear what they have to say. Something is not right here. Yes, Harry said, his voice tight. I don't want to hear the truth, whatever it is. Lupin looked at Harry and nodded once, firmly. And you will get it, he promised, an air of finality in his tone.